buy a digital still or video camera, you're primarily paying for two things: a fancy megapixel imaging chip and some precisely engineered glass in the form of a lens. The image sensor, while interesting, is probably so complex that it defies a simple explanation. The lens, however, still follows the same rules of optical physics that governed Galileo's universe. In this segment, we're going to dissect a camcorder lens on a virtual optical bench, show you what all those lens numbers mean, and explain why they're important as we step through the looking glass on TechKnow. The tiny lens on this camera phone here probably cost next to nothing to manufacture. The Fujian on our Vericam, however, retails for tens of thousands of dollars. And extreme zoom lenses can cost nearly $200,000. When you're shopping for a digital camera, you can pretty much estimate the price if you know two things. First, how many megapixels are on the image sensor, and second, what's the power of the optical zoom. It's really all about the glass. Let's start our discussion with a look at a simplified lens. Here we have an objective lens at the front and a focusing lens that can move back and forth to create a sharp image on the focal plane. This is fundamentally how all lens systems work. In a camcorder or digital still camera, we'll put a CCD at the position of the focal plane, of course. Crisp, clear focus is the obvious goal here. But as those of us who are getting older can attest, focus is more than just a matter of in focus or out of focus. So, for example, when something near the camera is in focus, the distant background might be out of focus, or vice versa. The focal length of a simple lens is the distance from the center of the lens to the focal plane. In a complex lens system, the discussion is, well, more complex, since the center of the lens often means the center of the lens elements that make up the entire lens. The focal length of a lens is listed in the specifications for a camcorder or lens and is measured in millimeters. For example, let's say we have a smallish camcorder lens here that has a focal length listed as 5 to 50 millimeters. If we divide 50 millimeters by 5, we get 10, which is, not coincidentally, the optical zoom power of this lens, 10x. Longer focal length lenses are called telephoto lenses. The minimum focal length is the shortest you can go and gives you the widest field of view. The actual zoom elements of an afocal lens system are at the front of a lens, and in the simplest configuration require 3 chunks of glass. As the middle piece of glass moves back, the zoom increases. Zooming in on something also reduces the field of view. Short focal length lenses are referred to as wide or wide-angle lenses. Wide fields are especially nice when you're shooting in a small interior space where getting everyone to scrunch up together for a group shot can be tough. The other stat besides focal length that you will commonly see listed for a lens is the f-stop or f number. Most simply, the f-stop is a ratio of the focal length divided by the diameter of the lens aperture. So in the simplest situation, an f-stop of f1 on a lens with a 50 millimeter focal length means that the lens aperture itself is 50 millimeters wide. Changing the f-stop changes the aperture, which controls the amount of light entering the camera. Smaller f-stops mean wider aperture, which seems odd at first. f1 on a 50 millimeter focal length lens means a 50 millimeter aperture. f2 means a 25 millimeter aperture. Remember, this is a ratio of the focal length to the diameter. So larger f-stops mean larger divisors and smaller apertures. The speed of a lens is determined by its maximum aperture setting. f1.4 is considered to be fast. More light coming in means you can use faster shutter speeds. It's easy enough to understand that smaller apertures mean less light for the exposure, and at a most basic level, this is what the aperture is for. But a wider aperture also means a shallower depth of field, and thus more selective control over what is in focus and what's not. Longer focal lengths also mean a shallower depth of field. Taken together, you get the shallowest depth of field and the most artistic control over your focus with your camera when the aperture is wide open and you're zoomed in as far as possible. The only catch here is that you need a wide aperture, which means a larger lens. Small, convenient consumer cameras with smaller lenses have smaller apertures, and thus relatively less control over the depth of field. Real-world camcorder lenses are more complicated than what we've presented here, with more precision elements and features like teleextenders that double the zoom and optical image stabilization. The lens complex can easily account for at least half the cost of a consumer camcorder, and in the professional realm, the lens can easily cost more than the camera body itself. So let's review what we can tell about a lens based on manufacturer reported numbers. First, we have the focal length range. A 2.5mm focal length is considered short and provides a wide field of view. Second, we have the f-stop, which is expressed as a ratio of the focal length and defines the size of the aperture. It is a ratio, so smaller f numbers mean larger apertures. Finally, we have the filter diameter, which is especially important if your camcorder has a fixed lens, since the threads on the barrel will let you add 2x teleextenders or wide-angle adapters. While our trip through the looking glass certainly wasn't as interesting as Alice's, I hope you found this to be time well spent, because the lens is easily one of the most important and expensive parts of any camera. With that in mind, I'd like to leave you with a recommendation. Find the filter diameter of your lens and get a clear or UV protector. Get an expensive one or get a cheap one, but get one, because damage to your camcorder's lens is a $500 accident waiting to happen. At least. Until next time, happy shooting.